As technology advances, we get closer to the perfect simulation. Graphics are more realistic, physics are more accurate, and the experience is more immersive than ever. But it wasn't always like this. Many years ago, my father was a reporter covering local rallies. My memory of those times is a bit fuzzy, but I remember helping him take notes. My parents have also told me that I was a car addict back then, that I knew the brands, the models, and the drivers. I looked up not only to famous drivers like Colin McRae, but also those that showed up on local races. I wonder where Gustav Loru is right now. Whether this is all just time and memory playing tricks on me, I guess I'll never know. I had this game for the Mega Drive called Lotus II RECS, which is actually an enhanced port of Lotus 3 for the Amiga, and I use the word enhanced very loosely. There isn't much to say about it. The gameplay is extremely simple, the graphics are primitive, and the pretty decent music was a double-edged sword, because you could only have music or sound effects, and the menus were clearly designed by beings on a higher plane of existence. Aside from the big Chungus cartridge, the only thing that stands out is RECS, Race Environment Construction System. In short, it's a randomized race generator. Infinite replayability sounds nice, but the gameplay is so limited that everything just kinda blends together. You don't race opponents so much as you try to get past them. The technology to simulate an entire set of AI opponents in an entire track just wasn't there. You don't even have 360 degrees of freedom. You simply try to keep yourself from hitting the obstacles on the side. This is how many racing games worked back when it was released. Instead of rendering fully 3D graphics, developers relied on clever sprite scaling to imitate depth. There were exceptions, but it's this style that I remember as the beginning of the genre. But even as a kid I knew that there were better alternatives, even if they didn't let me race on Saturn. That's not to say that the gameplay can't be entertaining. If this arcadey type of racing interests you, look up Horizon Chase Turbo. It's cheap, has a really rad soundtrack and runs on toasters. Outrun 2 and its derivatives also play similarly, but like its creator once said, it's more about driving than racing. Maybe it's just splitting hairs, but Outrun doesn't quite coincide with what I will focus on. So let's talk about the other nostalgic racing game from my younger years. When my family first got a PC long ago, they bought me my first PC game, Michelin Rally Masters Race of Champions. This is an old rally game based on an actual competition of the same name, and developed by a company that you've probably never heard of, Digital Illusion CE, or DICE for short. Unfortunately, I can't get it to run perfectly on my current PC. It straight up crashes if the palette textures are enabled, so it's missing some particle effects. It also only runs at complete random, so you have to boot it up over and over until it decides to play nice. Old stuff always finds new ways to break. Not even DiGi-Voodoo 2 could save it this time. Once it does run, it plays fine, aside from a few missing menu backgrounds and music, so at least there's that. The game is also on PS1, and it's actually really impressive given the limitations. But you're better off playing on PC, so you can have better graphics, unlocked frame rates and more control options. Anyway, just like Lotus, there isn't much to say about it nowadays. It's a straightforward rally simulator, without any story or management elements. You have the Race of Champions, your usual sort of championships, and customizable single races. There's some very basic car tuning options too. But back then, this was the work of God. The driving, the cars, the tracks, everything just clicked right when I first played it. The driving model is what you would expect from a pseudo-realistic simulator. Cars drive differently from one another, the multiple terrain types force you to adjust your handling, and it has a locational damage system that affects your vehicle's performance. But it's never too punishing or complex. There's no repair costs to worry about, the tracks don't have sneaky pebbles ready to sucker punch you, and damage never goes so far as to render the car completely useless. It's pretty much a perfect entry point into rally games. As a dumb little kid, that was exactly what I needed, and it remained my go-to racing game until Dirt 3 came along. But wait, haven't I previously said that Need for Speed games were my favorites during the mid-2000s? And just recently made that video where I jerked off Forza Horizon 4? Yeah, I'm contradicting myself here, but allow me to explain the thought process behind what I'm saying. Over the years, I played other titles that qualify as racing games. For example, I greatly enjoyed the mid-2000s Need for Speed games. You built up a collection of cars ranging from everyday wheelboxes to the most exotic of luxury beasts, and in the process, you could customize them to your liking. Forza also has some customization, but not the aftermarket body kits of Need for Speed. What it has is a massive open world with tons to see and a frankly ludicrous selection of cars to collect. But both have races, Mary, what's the difference? Put simply, I don't play them for the racing. In fact, that recent video didn't show any races. Need for Speed's driving mechanics were never particularly good either, so if Underground 2 was exclusively about racing, it would be kind of garbage. And that's what separates these games from Rally Masters, and from the games I'll talk about now. In June of 2007, Colin McRae Dirt was released on PC and Xbox 360. Even though I have owned a copy since it came with a magazine back in 2008 or so, I basically never touched it until now. Back then, I was still rocking an old pre-built that could only play it at a cinematic 10 FPS. But now, armed with an overkill system and a YouTube channel, I finally booted this sucker up and played through about half of the career mode. And I'm not exactly impressed. Dirt wants to be a simulator. It has a trickle of management, progression and mechanical setups. But once you get into a car, everything kind of falls apart. The driving is straight up arcadey, in an awkward sort of way. Braking is nearly instant and steering is twitchy, letting you easily correct mistakes and overcome tight curves with no problem. It feels at odds with the rest of the game. Tracks with many tight corners just don't work very well when you can slow down to safe speeds in a second. It's like they were designed for different driving physics. And I guess that as a result of these driving physics, every car and every track blend together. Front wheel, four wheel, rear wheel drive, it doesn't matter because they all turn and brake the same. Tarmac or gravel, dry or wet, it doesn't matter much either, because you can still turn and brake very fast. The trucks are more grounded, but they are also a good example of how vehicles feel like paperweights. Jumps like impact, and even the heavy trucks just bounce around like an inflatable. Together with crash physics that seem to actively amplify the obstacle's counterforce, and the whole thing feels more jerky than me on a Friday night. Dirt also comes from a time where post-processing vomit was the industry standard. It's like the screen itself is covered in dirt, and the bloom is so strong that sometimes you can barely read the logos on each livery. Thankfully, you can fix that, which is why some footage looks like poop, and some looks like a game from 2007. What I remember the most about Dirt 1 is the sad and ironic timing of the PS3 version's release in Europe. September 14, the day right before Colin McRae died in a helicopter accident. I have this other racing game in my collection that features a famous driver on its name, Richard Burns Rally. It wasn't until 2 or 3 years ago that I learned two unique things about this game. The first thing is that it has a hardcore following that continues to mod and improve the original 2004 game to this day. You see, until Dirt Rally in 2015, Richard Burns Rally was considered the rally simulator. The other thing is that Richard Burns is also dead. He died a year after the game's release from a brain tumor. never to see how dedicated fans of his game were. Watch out, Sebastian Loeb, you could be next. Colin McRae Dirt 2 was released in 2009. Whether it's good or not, I couldn't tell you, and that's probably not going to change since the game isn't officially sold anymore due to licensing issues. What I can tell you about is Dirt 3. The Colin McRae name is no longer attached to it, but it's the same series as it always was. What made this game special for me is that it's pretty much Rally Masters with a modern coat of paint. The driving physics are very similar, and the game doesn't concern itself much with the technical side of racing, so it's very easy to pick up and play. In fact, while the driving itself is vastly superior, tuning options have actually gone backwards since Dirt 1. Still has post-processing vomit by default though. On top of the rally part itself, Dirt 3 also has more variety. There's Rallycross, involving small tracks with cars battling for control at every turn. There's Trailblazer, which has ridiculously over-engineered cars and is all about going fast. There's Gymkhana, which is friggin' stupid and everyone hated it. Dirt 3 also has this flashback system that lets you rewind a few seconds back and restart from there, which is cool for people like me who aren't super hardcore. Regardless, sometime later I joined a driving school to get a driver's license. And like any video game addicted twat, I did the most gamer thing I could have done. I booted up the game and headed straight into the options menu. I turned off all assists, disabled the HUD, switched to manual gears, and set the camera to cockpit view. I jumped into a race and immediately confirmed the obvious. Driving in real life is nothing like driving with a controller. But it changed my habits. Now I play without HUD, because it's strangely much more immersive like that, even if it doesn't seem like a big deal. I still play with automatic gears and chase camera though. Anyway, these habits carried over to Dirt 3's successors, which is what I'm going to talk about now. During a Steam sale last year, I picked up Dirt 4 and Dirt Rally. I knew more or less what I was getting into with Rally, but 4 was a bit of a wild card because opinions seemed to be divided between pretty okay and absolute cocks. After playing it for about 50 hours in the next 2 weeks, I had formed my own opinion. Codemasters' first mistake was trying to appeal to everyone. Dirt 4 is more like a light version of Dirt Rally than it is a follow-up to Dirt 3, but it doesn't fully commit to either side, and as a result fails to completely appeal to anyone. It tries to get around the sliding scale of realism with gamer and simulation modes. Gamer is what I play with, and I will explain why I love it in a few minutes. But simulation is just kind of awkward and unwieldy, and hardly more realistic. It's like gamer, except mistakes are 5 times more punishing. You can also adjust a variety of assists, but this is tied to the difficulty rating, and the more simulator inclined it is, the more you are rewarded. Instead of making it harder within the confines of arcade, it's more of a choice between forgiving realism and unforgiving realism. And the fact that the flashback system is completely gone instead of being an option just boggles the mind. To be clear, I don't know exactly how realistic the games are. Dirt Rally 2.0 seems to be considered quite realistic and has been used in actual esports competitions, but I have never had any driving experience that's close to the one in these games. But neither have most people anyway. All I do in real life is drive a boring old city car through boring old streets while following the boring old rules. The fastest I can go here is 100 km per hour on the highway, which is mostly a straight line anyway. But in a racing game, there are no such limits. I can flat out all the way and not be too worried, because even if I crash into a wall or run over someone, the consequences only exist in the game. Anyway, the second major problem with Dirt 4 is where everything comes full circle. Dirt 4 doesn't have handmade, carefully designed levels. Instead, it attempts to sell itself on endless replayability by having a random track generator. You know, just like Lotus II RECS. But it doesn't take more than 4 or 5 hours before you start noticing the repetition. The generator only has so many building blocks, and eventually you start recognizing them, like the ramp leading to towns in Spain, or the short downwards entry into Wales's forests. The tracks themselves don't feel natural. They're like a series of random driving challenges, without unique twists and obstacles of its own. It's especially bad in the harder championships, because of course the algorithm is going to generate long tracks with tons of sharp turns, and of course they're going to be at night, it will be raining, and there will be fog. It becomes predictably unpredictable. Naturally, the pace notes are also generated automatically. For the most part they work fine, but sometimes they have awkward timing or misleading directions. You could argue that DiRT4 is fundamentally flawed as a rally simulator, but something about it clicked with me. The cars are beautiful, they feel powerful and heavy like they should be, and the sounds are basically ASMR. It's also authentic enough for different cars to be a different driving experience, which Need for Speed and DiRT1 failed horribly at. It was more like driving different skins than different cars. DiRT3 was an improvement, but in DiRT4 and both rallies it's immediately apparent. On one end, cars like the Hyundai R5 are so easy and pleasant to control that it's actually kind of relaxing, but on the other end you have monsters like the Lancia Stratos, with which you'll be struggling to even go in a straight line. I used to think that DiRT3 was the sweet spot between arcade and realism. But there's this very real sense of weight to the cars in DiRT4, so now it feels rather floaty. That applies to Rally 1 as well. Cars in that game almost feel like they are on ice. And look, I'm not qualified to judge realism, but I think a lot of the hate comes from some misguided belief that sliding all over the place equals being realistic. I like Dirt Rally 2.0 more, since the cars no longer feel like paperweights. In fact, I would say that Rally 2.0 is better than DiRT4 as well. But right now, DiRT4's middle ground is the perfect racing game for me. Except for the cross karts, those can go screw themselves. In retrospective, DiRT3's progression is pretty boring. The game treats you like a god, but gives you little in terms of player expression. Cars and sponsors are unlocked in a fixed order, so using anything besides the car with the biggest bonus is counterproductive. It's so streamlined that it's actually kind of frustrating. DiRT4 is different. You still have a fixed set of challenges, but how you go through them is up to you. You manage your team. You pick the cars and sponsors. You choose how to spend your earnings. You can design your own livery and run with your own vehicles instead of splitting the profits with sponsors. This made progression so much more engaging. It felt like I was actually progressing in my career instead of going through a checklist. It's so extremely simple, but it's just enough to enhance the experience. The licensed music that plays between races also served as an interval from the onslaught of engine noises, and I've even found myself humming along to some of it. Like that catchy one about driving a Cherokee, which is kind of funny because you can't drive any Jeeps in this game. Another thing that gives me a reason to boot up the game is the timed events, which were first introduced in Dirt Rally. These come in daily, weekly and monthly challenges, and you have one attempt at showing the world how good you are at the game with a predetermined track and vehicle. This sounds like low-effort content, and well, it is, but its effect is more profound than you might think. Just like single player, you earn money from these races. Money that can then be invested into your collection. It's also in these timed events that the randomly generated stages truly shine. With these, there is no memorization to help you gain an advantage. Because you can't know what you're getting, DiRT4's timed events are all about the player's ability to adapt to the unknown. If they have a vehicle that you're not used to, it's an opportunity to get out of your comfort zone. Who knows, you might even discover a new favorite. Except for the cross karts, those really can go screw themselves. And if it's a vehicle you're comfortable with, you feel confidence growing inside you as you set off to see just how much you have improved since you started. I'm not a competitive kind of guy, but when I manage to get my name on the top 50 of the leaderboard, I can't help but get a smug sense of satisfaction. Of course, there aren't that many people playing it. I've seen DiRT4's daily races peak at about 500 entries, while Rally 2.0 constantly gets several thousands. This shouldn't be a surprise, because even Codemasters didn't care much about it. Dirt 3 got a bunch of DLC packs, Dirt Rally got a bunch of substantial free updates, and Rally 2.0 is pretty much a milk factory. Dirt 4 got the Hyundai R5 and a pay-to-win set of crew members. Dirt 4 is far from a perfect game. The randomly generated tracks are more suited as extra content than the main focus of a serious rally game. And if it had the content of Dirt Rally 2.0, I would probably never need another rally game ever again. But it gets the driving physics right, and the management bits keep you engaged while giving you milestones to work towards. It has made me rethink what the racing genre means to me and what I personally want from it. I have even thought about buying a wheel and even a VR headset in the future, because it feels like I'm missing something. But it's so hard to justify the cost and effort when I only use it on a handful of games. In the meantime, Dirt 5 has been announced. Codemasters seems to have learned their lesson, and now the series will be split between the more radical and arcadey Dirt and the simulation-focused Dirt Rally. Which puts me in an awkward position. Based on the footage I've seen, I'm sure that Dirt 5 will be a good, very enjoyable game. But something tells me that I won't enjoy it as much as I seriously hope to. But however it goes, no other game in recent years has brought back my love for cars in the same way that Dirt 4 did. And for that, it has earned a special place in my hard drive.